Hello, I'm Jim Falk, and thank you so much for joining our program. Today's discussion is on a very important topic that, due to the film Oppenheimer and saber rattling from Russia and North Korea, is especially timely, and that's nuclear weapons. The euphoria at the end of the Cold War is now, unfortunately, a distant, fleeting memory. Today, Russia, China, and the United States are each committed to robust and expensive nuclear modernization programs, while at the same time, long-standing arms control treaties have either been suspended or canceled. So with that in mind, let's welcome our experts. First, I'd like to welcome Sarah Scoles. She's a science journalist and author of Countdown, The Blinding Future of Nuclear Weapons. It was published just a few months ago in February of this year. Her articles have been published widely in the New York Times, The Atlantic, Popular Science, and Scientific American, and many other places. Jay Coghlan is also with us. He lives in Santa Fe, and he's the president of Nuclear Watch New Mexico. That organization was established in 1999, and it promotes safety and environmental protection at nuclear facilities and diversification away from nuclear weapons programs. Our final guest is Hans Christensen. He's the director of the Nuclear Information Project at the Federation of American Scientists, and he's the co-author of what's called the Nuclear Notebook Column. Sarah, I'd like to start with you because in your book, you really do give a good, concise outline of what the NSNNSA is, the laboratories, the National Nuclear Security Administration, and just take a minute and set the context, and then we'll move into the modernization program and some of the other issues we want to talk about.
Sure. So after the Manhattan Project developed the first nuclear weapons, in the decades after that, an organization formed called the Department of Energy. And the Department of Energy oversees nuclear weapons through an organization called the National Nuclear Security Administration, which is kind of an autonomous government agency, and they oversee national labs that kind of keep the nuclear arsenal functioning up to date and also do other research.
And so where are the labs?
The three main nuclear weapons labs, one which people are probably familiar with, is located in Los Alamos, New Mexico. There's another one called Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in California. And then there's also Sandia National Laboratories in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And those are the three main weapons labs.
Do they have different mandates, different missions?
Yes, they do. Los Alamos National Laboratory is historically, at least, a research laboratory that does a lot of the scientific and design work behind nuclear weapons. Lawrence Livermore is somewhat similar, historically was involved in the design of thermonuclear weapons, and Sandia National Laboratories has been involved in the engineering of the non-nuclear parts of nuclear weapons.
So, Hans, just a week ago, I was with Dr. Sig Hecker, who is the director emeritus of the Los Alamos National Laboratory and has been on our program before talking about North Korea. He said he was as worried today about what he called a nuclear order as he's ever been. What are the trends that we're seeing now taking place in, I guess I should say, the growth of nuclear weapons, as well as the failure of a lot of what we used to see in disarmament?
Yeah, the big trends are that the what we got used to after the end of the Cold War, the reduction of nuclear arsenals, the reduction of the role of nuclear weapons, efforts to move the world toward deep cuts and eventually elimination. That trend is over. We don't know if it's over for good or if it's plateaued or whatever the situation is. Now we have a situation that's characterized by openly hostile relations. Countries are openly criticizing, some more than others threatening, but all are deeply involved in a significant modernization of the nuclear arsenals. And it results both in new types of weapons for more scenarios, but also what we now see an increase in the number of nuclear weapons in the military stockpiles.
Jay, how do you see it?
Well, I'm pretty much aligned with Hans. I was a child of the Cold War, lived through duck and cover and all that good stuff. And, the peace dividend never came from the end of the Cold War. And we're actually back, call it nuclear arms race number two, that arguably is even more dangerous. I will give an exception to the Cuban Missile Crisis. I think that was the most dangerous humanity has ever come. But we're back there with increased threats because we have multipolar adversaries. We have new hypersonic weapons, artificial intelligence, cyber warfare. There's too many variables. In short, we're at a very dangerous time. That danger is rising, and it shows like yours that help put that into public consciousness, and hopefully we can turn that around someday.
Hans, you probably keep the best count of anyone other than maybe some people at the CIA or the Pentagon about the number of nuclear weapons. Give us a sense, if you would, of just the growth in China, say in the last decade. And yeah.
Yeah, China is a unique case right now because it's among all the nuclear weapon states, it's the country that comparatively is increasing its arsenal the most. It's a very broad modernization that's been going on for over a decade, but especially over the last sort of 5 years, we've seen a boom, if you will, both most dramatically illustrated by construction of more than 300 missile silos in the desert. This is a program of a scale that we have never seen China do before. And you literally have to go back to sort of the days in the 60s and 70s when the Soviet Union and the United States were competing and building vast, inventories of missile silos. We haven't seen anything of this magnitude before. So China has clearly departed sort of a long-term policy of a minimum deterrent to something bigger. We don't know where it's going to go. That they don't talk much about it, and it's really hard to get a conversation going with the Chinese on these matters.
What do you think their motivation is? I'll ask you, Hans, and anybody else who has a thought.
Yeah, I think it's a mix. They very clearly are reacting to a decree from the leadership, President Xi, that China by the middle of this century has to be a world-class military power. That includes, of course, building up nuclear forces. But there are other issues too, such as reacting to what they see as a significant threat from U.S., potentially Russian, and also Indian military forces against their ability to respond with nuclear weapons if necessary. And under the hood, there might be sort of new missions trying to escalate or control escalation. We don't know many details about that. So it's a portfolio of these types of factors.
Let me ask you this before I ask the others to respond. We know that Russia has highly developed tactical nuclear weapons, U.S. less so. Where does China stand on that?
Not so much. I mean, they have regional weapons, but they don't have tactical nuclear weapons designed for nuclear battlefield scenarios, so to speak. Those were the scenarios that really led to the Soviet and the U.S. development of tactical nuclear weapons during the Cold War. Their issue is more about where are the targets for potential weapons, and some of those targets are in the region near them. They don't need intercontinental weapons to hit them, so they have medium-range system for those type of targets.
So, Sarah, when you were writing your book, I know you had incredible access. China must have come up in some of your conversations. What did you hear?
Yes, I mean, I think all of the nuclear states are kind of responding to each other's modernization, upgrade, and expansion programs, and just trying to keep up with each other and surpass each other in the event that they do decide to use nuclear weapons, and also if they do not, to uphold their deterrent forces. And so it does kind of become the arms race that my colleagues were describing as they all try to keep up with the nuclear Joneses out there in the world.
Jay, would you call that a manufactured crisis?
Well, I'm going to go back 70 years, and my cynical opinion is that a lot of this has been manufactured all along, and in the so-called name of deterrence. Now, I want to credit my colleague Hans here. He pointed out to me this is a good dozen years ago or so, but The American public, and I'm going to extend this globally to citizens around the world, they've been sold this bill of goods about so called deterrence. And what Hans pointed out to me, and it's been reinforced by others such as Daniel Ellsberg, but we've never had just deterrence. It's always been a hybrid of deterrence and nuclear warfighting capabilities. And this is actually explicitly stated in Pentagon doctrine. So, where am I going with this? Manufactured crises. We have finger pointing at each other, at our adversaries, mutually assured destruction, etc. But what it boils down to is the ability of humanity to destroy itself. So, by all means, recommended reading The Doomsday Machine by Daniel Ellsberg. And we need to somehow rise above this as the human race. Don't come knocking on my door because I don't know how to do it, but we need to transcend above this threat.
Well, it looks like we're going the opposite direction when we talk about the modernization program. And Sarah, give us a sense of that scope of the modernization program, how much money is being spent and what it's being used for.
Yeah, well, over the course of about 30 years, there are different estimates for how much the modernization program will cost, but somewhere between $1 and $2 trillion, probably as government goes closer to the 2 trillion end, and that involves Department of Defense elements. So the missiles and delivery systems that would take nuclear weapons to their unfortunate intended destination, and then also on the National Nuclear Security Administration side, updating the actual warheads, the actual weapons. So in some cases that involves things like new electronics, new fuses, new conventional explosives inside. It also involves new radioactive plutonium parts. And so just kind of remaking and in some cases increasing the capabilities of the weapons that we have that are decades old at this point.
And I want to come back to the plutonium pits in a minute, but Hans, before we do that, where are we standing now on some of the treaties? I know essentially Russia has withdrawn. The opportunity for negotiations on a New START treaty appears unlikely. That expires when? Is that 2026? Is that right?
Yes, early 26. Yeah. Basically, most of the nuclear order we had during the build-up during the Cold War years that were intended to manage and limit the nuclear competition, much of that order has sort of fallen away. Now we are, and it's not just the nuclear treaties, also other agreements, of course. Now we're down to a single agreement in terms of limiting force levels, the New START treaty you mentioned. And once that expires in early 26, there will be no limits, numerical limits of any kind of any nuclear arsenal anywhere. And this is the first time, I think we have to go back to the 1970s, that we've had such a situation. And this is a big tragedy, of course, because once you get into this dynamic, competitive environment where people think the solution to the crisis is more weapons or better weapons or whatever the circumstances are, these things tend to fall away and can take a long time to build up new controls of these arsenals. So we're in a very problematic phase right now.
How close do you think North Korea is to being able to launch a missile, a nuclear warhead against the United States, reach the United States?
Well, in terms of range and capability to get here, they've demonstrated the missiles that can reach this far. What's a little unclear is whether they have a functioning warhead that would be able to survive those kind of conditions. No matter, they're going to get it sooner or later if they don't already have it. But of course, so, anyone can launch their nuclear weapons today. The question is, will they, in a certain situation, decide that that is the way to go? And so here we are, that in this very dynamic and threatening environment, people sort of end up in two camps. One camp says, nuclear weapons are dangerous, we need to get rid of them. The other camp says, yes, you're right, nuclear weapons are dangerous, that's why we need to keep them until we can get an agreement or something to get rid of them all. So people land in these two very different boxes in terms of solution to this problem.
Well, Hans, we're going to have you back and do a lot more of a discussion on various nuclear treaties. Sarah, one of the things that I've found, again, interesting about your book is while you are a scientific journalist, you made it quite understandable about plutonium pits. What are they? Why are they important? And why are they being modernized with, what is it, 30 supposed to be built at Los Alamos, 50 at Savannah Flats? What's the deal about them? And then, Jay, I want to hear from you why you think what's happening is so dangerous and a real concern about safety.
Sure. So plutonium pits are at the center of most modern nuclear weapons. They're hollow spheres of this plutonium metal, and they're surrounded by conventional explosives, non-radioactive regular explosives. And to start off a nuclear weapons detonation, those explosives go off, kind of crush this sphere of plutonium so that it gets closer together and hotter, and then that begins the fission reaction, so the splitting of plutonium that is the beginning of the nuclear chain reaction. So it's essentially the starter gun for modern thermonuclear weapons. And so we have a number of these pits already, and they are in weapons, and we have them stockpiled also. But they are all decades old, and so some scientists are worried about, will they work as intended? And I'm sure that Jay will get into more of this. But we've embarked on a program to replace the ones.
But we're essentially talking about a metal, and we don't know whether or not that metal, which is 40 to 50 years old, whether it's degrading and if it will work or not. Is that correct?
Yes, that's the argument in favor of making new pits, yes.
And I have a quote here from the current director of the Los Alamos lab that was in a 2021 report at the lab. It's sort of a glass half full, half empty. We can't prove that they will fail, but we also can't prove that they will work. Jay, I think that's a good launching pad, no pun intended, for you.
Well, that, of course, you're quoting LANL director Tom Mason. And I find that response a little too fatuous for, for my taste. Public information on the aging of plutonium pits is pretty sparse. I got a little show and tell. I and two of my colleagues filed a Freedom of Information Act request on NNSA's plan for plutonium pit aging studies. And quickly, what we got back is this. You see, it's all blanked out.
Looks like some serious redactions. Yeah.
Yeah, it's 40% redacted by volume. Now, why this is such a crucial issue and I'm going to have to give the elevator speech. In 2006, a group of scientists called the Jasons concluded that pits last at least 85 years, and they did not determine an expiration date. So the laboratories are playing on this small degree of uncertainty. There has not been a full updated new study since then. I contend that NNSA is slow walking any new results because it won't be in their interest.
Now, wait a minute, let me stop you. Hold on. When you say interest, do you mean essentially their organizational interest of getting the budget and hiring the personnel and so forth?
I'll put it this way. Los Alamos's nuclear weapons budget has doubled over the last decade. The pit facility at the Savannah River site is going to cost around $25 billion, making it the second most expensive building in human history. By way of comparison, the new World Trade Center costs $4 billion. The money spigot is wide open. The nuclear weapons complex and the labs have money like they've never had before. That's what I mean by their interests.
Sarah, again, you have talked to so many people And somebody once asked me, is Sarah pro or against? And I said she looks at it in a pretty objective way and talks to a lot of people. How do you see this?
Yeah, I mean, as a journalist, it is kind of my job to try to see the different sides of an argument. And so there is the argument that, we don't know a lot about plutonium's aging, in part because the national labs have not done enough research on it. And so we are not sure exactly how they will behave in the future. And there's no problems right now, but what if problems arise in the future? And here's an insurance program. We could just build some more of them. So that's one argument. And then, as Jay points out, this is big business for the labs, and it is also, the first many pits that are produced will not go toward replacing pits in older weapons, but toward updated systems and new weapons. So I think, like most things, I think there's truth to both sides of the arguments here.
But as we see what's happening in China and Russia, I mean, it seems to me that we need to do everything we can to be sure that our weapons, we know how they're going to work and that they're state of the art.
Sure. I mean, if you are a believer in deterrence, which a lot of people within the nuclear weapons world are, deterrence only works if you're willing to actually pull the trigger, and if everybody else in the world believes that your weapons will do what you say they will do. If you deploy them, and so it's true that if there are doubts about the plutonium pits working, then that's a problem for deterrence.
I'm so glad you brought up about belief in whether or not they will work, because that is a good segue into the question of testing. We have not done live testing since, 1992? It was George Bush. So how confident are we that nuclear weapons will perform the way we think they will? And what we do subcritical test, is that adequate?
Right. Today, without full-scale nuclear testing, we do smaller scale experiments like the subcritical testing and other, we have other facilities for testing. And then we also essentially try to create twins of the weapons within supercomputers to simulate how they will behave. And that's very complex. We have a better understanding of nuclear weapons than we ever have. And so, most people are pretty confident in the simulations. At the same time, we're doing things like designing new weapons and doing upgrades. We're not just trying to maintain what we have. And so I think there are some doubts going forward about whether you can truly know how they behave without ever doing a full-scale test of one.
And that gets back to the nuclear modernization program. We're designing some new weapons, which we haven't done in an extensive period of time. Is that right?
Yes, mainly we have a fully new weapon called the W93, which its design is not finished yet, so we don't know, and probably won't ever know exactly how different it is from what's out there already. But it is the first time we've designed a weapon without being able to just blow it up and see if it works as expected.
Jay, I want to get back to the subject of safety, because I was just reading an article last night, and it talked about how part of the modernization program is to move the warheads to somewhere outside of Amarillo, where the pits will be removed, and then the pits go back to Los Alamos, and then they go back to, I mean, that seems like a lot of time on I-40 that worries me a little bit. How safe is that?
There are not known serious transportation incidences. I do say known, but the scheme that you're describing is the so-called disposition of excess weapons grade plutonium, and there's some 40 metric tons of that. And there's the Pantex plant, something like 15 miles outside of Amarillo, Texas. So they were going to bring old pits, and there's believed to be up to 20,000 pits stored at Pantex. They're going to bring it to Los Alamos. They were going to Los Alamos was going to render those pits into plutonium oxide, ship it to a Savannah River site in South Carolina for dilution, and then ship it back to New Mexico to the waste isolation pilot plant for disposal. Now, it's relevant to our discussion here because just last week there was a decision by NNSA to delay that program in order to prioritize plutonium pit production. And it all kind of converges at the same main plutonium facility at the Los Alamos lab. And so NNSA is predicting that that surplus program won't be done until 2050. So that's like off into never, never land. But again, they're throwing everything they got into plutonium pit production.
Sarah, why are they so behind schedule?
I think a lot of people would like to know the answer to that question. To me, I think, there's a combination of things. Number one, probably the main thing is it's not something we have done since the late 1980s. We don't have the kind of worker expertise. We don't have the facilities. We don't have the management structure. It's just, if you stop doing something entirely and then try to start it up, it's probably going to take longer than you think. And then I think also that the facilities that we're talking about, the PF4 at Los Alamos, and then the very large, expensive building in Savannah River in South Carolina, neither of those was designed for pit production. And so we're kind of retrofitting them to do this really huge, really complicated job.
Wait a minute. Did I hear you right? You said they weren't designed for it.
They were not designed to do large scale production of plutonium pits. No, the PF4 building it's a plutonium facility, but it was never designed to be a plutonium factory. And the building in South Carolina was part of another project previously that they're now redesigning it and updating it to do pit productions.
Well, I wish we had more time, and I want to thank all three of you for spending part of your day with us. As much as we might wish that countries could agree to complete disarmament of their nuclear stockpiles, I think you all agree that that's not going to happen anytime in the near future. One way to measure success will be that they remain a threat and are never launched. As our three experts noted, more transparency with the American public and among the countries that hold nuclear weapons would certainly be a positive development. And while we can't do it alone, resuming serious disarmament talks would also be a step in the right direction, don't you agree? To learn more about these issues, we encourage you to become more informed by exploring the links now shown on your screen. And let me just say how happy we are and appreciative of all of you that spent part of your day with us, where we talk about things that matter with people who care.